Good afternoon, everyone. Hello, welcome. Thank you all for coming out. It's warming up. So I was a little worried originally when I was going to be so cold. I was like, gosh, I hope it's warming up. But yes, so we're getting here. Thanks for coming out today. It is my great pleasure to welcome back Thomas Keels. He has been here. This is your third time? Maybe fourth.
I think fourth.
Yeah. We really like having him here. Thank you so much for coming back. Tom is a lecturer, writer, and commentator specializing in Philadelphia history and architecture. He is the author or co-author of 7 published books, including Sesqui, Greed, Graft, and Forgotten World's Fair of 1926, Wicked Philadelphia, Sin and City of Brotherly Love, Forgotten Philadelphia, Lost Architecture of the Quaker City, and he has spoken to many of Philadelphia's leading cultural and historical organizations, including the American Institute of Architects, American Revolution Roundtable, Chestnut Hill Historical Society, and Curtis Institute of Music. For many years, Tom was a contributing writer for the Rittenhouse Square Review, writing monthly articles on Philadelphia landmarks and lore. It is my great pleasure to welcome Thomas Keels.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's such a pleasure to be back here talking about one of my favorite subjects, greed, graft, and corruption. It's hard finding this in Philadelphia, but if you dig hard enough, it will turn up eventually. And today I'm talking, Mary Angela mentioned my book on Sesqui, and as we move into our semi-quincentennial year, it might be useful to take a look backwards a century to 1926, when we actually hosted our second World's Fair, the Sesqui-Centennial International Exposition. As I'm sure some of you already know, it was not one of the most rewarding experiences in Philadelphia history, but I'm going to look at one of the bright points, the ladies of the street, or how a group of determined Philadelphia women almost saved the Sesqui-Centennial from complete ignominy. Now, this lady in this photograph is wearing the fashion statement of 1926, the Liberty Bell hat. The Liberty Bell was the official symbol of the Sesqui, oh, I'm so sorry. There we go. Yes, and of course, you must be sure you wear it with the crack at the front, and you have the clapper making a lovely sort of earring on the side. I think it is safe to say that none of the women I'm going to talk about today would have been caught dead wearing a hat like this. Now, as I mentioned, the Sesqui-Centennial International Exposition, or the Sesqui for short, held in South Philadelphia between May and December 1926, was not one of the great World's Fairs of all time. As a matter of fact, if you had the 10 worst fairs of all time, I think it would definitely be in the bottom 5. Based on past attendance and detailed demographic studies, its planners originally expected at least 30 million visitors and as many as 50 million. And instead, fewer than 5 million paying customers showed up. Now, this was less than half the number who paid to see the 1876 Centennial exhibition in West Fairmount Park, and this was when the population was about a third of what it was in 1926, and before they had invented useful things like cars and airplanes. So why did the Sesqui sink? Well, a variety of reasons. Originally, the fair was set to take place on the Fairmount Parkway. Today we call it the Ben Franklin Parkway, but it had just been completed in 1920 and was the city's newest civic showplace. Paul-Philippe Cray, the head of architecture at the University of Pennsylvania, had drawn up plans for a grandiose fair. It would have started at Logan Square, which had been reconfigured into Logan Circle, which would be surrounded by beautiful new buildings, not just the Free Library, but a new concert hall, a Hall of Justice. And then the upper parkway would be lined with permanent neoclassical buildings, exhibit halls that after the fair would house all of the city's major cultural and civic associations. And of course, the giant sundae on top of this would be the new Museum of Art atop the Fairmount Plateau. But there's more. If you go up into the Lemon Hill area, there would be a new municipal stadium. There would be formal gardens extending up to the old Centennial site. This design would have changed Philadelphia history. It would have taken the bare new parkway and truly made it into the city's Champs-Élysées. Well, we couldn't have that, could we? So instead, in early 1925, the Sesqui site was quickly and rather furtively moved from the parkway down to League Island Park at the very tip of South Philadelphia, just above the Navy Yard. Now, this was a very isolated, undeveloped area known as the Neck, dotted with trash heaps and truck farms. It was the poorest, least populated district in Philadelphia, and as you can see from this photograph, also one of the wettest. There was only one paved street connecting it with Center City, South Broad Street, and one trolley line. The Sesqui would take place in League Island Park, a semi-developed natural area between Pattison Avenue and the Philadelphia Navy Yard. This had been laid out by the Olmsted brothers before World War I, but was abandoned once America joined the war. In 1923, the city's leading architects and planners had rated League Island Park 13th out of 13 possible sites for the fair, while choosing Fairmount Park and the Parkway as the #1 choice. So, you know, why? Well, when the Sesqui moved south, Philadelphia had to pay over $12 million to truck in nearly 2 million cubic yards of landfill just to bolster the moist soil before a single building could be built. This did not just delay construction, but it effectively bankrupted the fair before it even opened. Of course, no problem, we're building the Broad Street subway up on North Broad Street, so we'll just pay a lot of developers a lot of money to truck our dirt from one end of Broad Street to the other. This is the fairgrounds looking north towards City Hall. This is what is today Marconi Plaza, and you can see City Hall in the background. This is South Broad Street, and this was taken about 8 months before the fair was supposed to open. As you can see, not a lot of buildings, just a lot of freshly laid dirt. Now, what happened? Well, the Neck was deep in the heart of the 1st Congressional District of Philadelphia, also known as Vairsville. And this was the power base of United States Congressman William S. Vair, the Duke of South Philadelphia. By 1922, Vair controlled the all-powerful Republican organization in the city. At this time, Philadelphia was an overwhelmingly Republican town. Only 5% of voters voted Democratic. And he basically ran everything. Bill had also grown up in the Neck. And so moving the Sesqui south was his latest idea in turning the somewhat benighted neighborhood of his youth into a model neighborhood like Chestnut Hill. Bill Vair had the entire municipal government in his pocket, from the mayor's office down to the lowliest beat cop. Charles Vair, the head of city council, seen it right, was a puppet. So was the new mayor, W. Freeland Kendrick, seen in the middle. After being elected mayor in November 1923, Kendrick arranged to have himself appointed president of the Sesqui-Centennial Exhibition Association, or SCEA, the fair's governing body. So it was his decision to move the fair down to South Philadelphia. But by doing so, he delivered a lot of needed infrastructure and thousands of jobs to his patrons' constituents, and also delivered millions of dollars in construction contracts to Bill Vair's construction and contracting companies. Now, a lot of people, this is like 1924, 1925. By this point, a lot of Philadelphians were already sick of the Sesqui. The Sesqui's official slogan was, "Let's ring it again," referring to the Liberty Bell. And there was actually an anti-World's Fair group that took this slogan and sort of put a new twist on it, literally and figuratively. Now, at this point, I'm so sorry, I lost my place here. At this point, a lot of Philadelphia's elite and movers and shakers were really distancing themselves from the fair. Gifford Pinchot, who was the Reform Republican governor of Pennsylvania, basically said, "You're not getting any state support from us." And people like former Governor Edwin Stewart, the former ambassador to Italy, Wilson Potter, and Lucretia Blankenberg, the widow of the late Reform Mayor Rudolph Blankenberg, all resigned from the SCEA. So at this point, Kendrick is desperate for support for his World's Fair. He has to make this work. So he turns to one of the most powerful and substantial and influential people in Philadelphia. Her name was Elizabeth Price Martin. She was known to the public as Mrs. J. Willis Martin and to her good friends as Lizzie. Her social credentials were impeccable. Her ancestors had come to Pennsylvania in the 1680s, not long after William Penn. Her grandfather, Eli Kirk Price, helped to create modern Philadelphia through the Consolidation Act of 1854 and the establishment of the Fairmount Park Commission in 1867. Her husband, seen at the center in the left photograph, was one of the foremost judges and lawyers in Philadelphia, while her brother, Eli Kirk Price II, seen at right accepting the Philadelphia Award, was a civic and cultural leader who helped to create both the Fairmount Parkway and the Philadelphia Museum of Art. So with her brother and her husband, Lizzie controlled an elite power block which had ties to every old Philadelphia institution in town. She and her husband split their time between 1709 Walnut Street, the house on the right, near Rittenhouse Square, and Edgecombe, a rambling Victorian manse on Bethlehem Pike in Chestnut Hill, which still stands today. You drive by it a lot, probably. Now, Elizabeth Martin had a talent for turning sow's ears into silk purses. In the early 20th century, she and her Rittenhouse Square neighbors formed the Rittenhouse Square Improvement Association to renovate the bedraggled square using the Parc Monceau in Paris as a model. They hired Paul-Philippe Cré, who recreated the square, much to the appearance that we know today, adding the reflecting pool, the sort of the X crossway in the middle, and many of the other amenities that still exist today. Martin and her friends also launched the Rittenhouse Square Flower Market to fund ongoing improvements at the square. During World War I, she was one of the founders of the Emergency Aid of Pennsylvania. This far-reaching organization not only helped American soldiers, European war victims during the Great Conflict, but during the Spanish flu epidemic of 1918, when the entire city government was on the verge of collapse, these women stepped in and really kept the city going. When women got the vote in 1920, Martin became president of the Pennsylvania Council of Republican Women. When she addressed the Republican National Convention in 1924, Will Rogers, the famous humorist, nominated her for the next president. He said, "She's the most intelligent person I've heard speak so far." So, given her credentials, her connections, and her organizational talents, it was understandable that Mayor Kendrick would reach out to her to help support his floundering World's Fair. In 1925, she was appointed the chairman of the Sesqui-Centennial Women's Committee. Now, she accepted the position reluctantly because she considered the male management of the fair and the city government, quote, a mass of putrid politics and graft. She insisted on having a free hand on running the Women's Committee, answering to no one at SCEA or City Hall. Soon, the Women's Committee contained the most powerful and socially prominent women in Philadelphia. These included Mrs. Barclay Warburton. She was the daughter of John Wanamaker, an early proponent of the Sesqui. Mrs. James Starr, who served as chairman of the membership committee. Mrs. Edward Stotesbury, the wife of the senior partner of Drexel & Company and the doyenne of White Marsh Hall. and Mrs. W. Freeland Kendrick, wife of the mayor. Despite Elizabeth Martin's distaste for her husband's politics, she realized the mayor's wife had to be on the committee. Once the committee was formed, attention turned to a suitable women's exhibit at the fair. For this, Martin consulted with her close friend, Sarah Dixon Lowry. Now, Sarah, little-known figure who should be much better known, had been active in the suffrage movement and in such reform efforts as public bathhouses for the poor. She was a founding member of the Fairmount Park Art Alliance, the Philadelphia Art Alliance, and the Philadelphia League of Women Voters. During the 1920s, she authored a popular column for the Public Ledger newspaper, As One Woman Sees It. Now, Sarah thought, since so much of Philadelphia's early life had centered on High Street, as Market Street was known for many years, she thought, why not build a composite of the whole life and history of High Street and its environs on one block? Lowry and Martin developed the concept of a High Street of 1776, filled with historic yet vanished structures. Besides celebrating the revolutionary past of America and Philadelphia, the street would also illustrate how women's sphere of influence had grown beyond the home to encompass the entire community. And it would also serve as the one corner of the fair where women could declare their independence from the corrupt male management. The street of 1776 would be located in the fair's southwest quadrant, below the Gladway Entertainment Area and west of the new Sesqui Stadium, later to be known as JFK Stadium. Thanks to its political and social clout, the Women's Committee was able to obtain a $200,000 grant from the cash-strapped SCEA to construct the exhibit, but they ended up contributing well over $100,000 of their own funds as well. The 800-foot-long byway would be lined with 22 buildings that had been landmarks on or near early High Street. Some were historic structures that had been demolished: the Town Hall and Courthouse, William Penn Slate Roof House, the house where President Washington lived when Philadelphia was the capital, and the house where Jefferson wrote the Declaration of Independence. Others were generic examples of the vernacular architecture that had once filled the city. For instance, the first brick house in Philadelphia and a small wooden cottage. Some of the early buildings that were in the plan, like the original Christ Church, did not make the final cut. Well, to create the street of 1776, the Women's Committee hired 3 architects, all of whom had excellent credentials among Philadelphia's upper crust. Richardson Bronyard Oakey, who would later redesign the Betsy Ross House and design the reconstruction of Pennsbury Manor, E. Perrott Bissell, and John P.B. Sinclair. By early 1926, construction was moving along nicely, and while the finished buildings looked quite substantial, they were actually temporary wooden frames sheathed with staff or stamped tin painted to look like brick. High Street was anchored at its southeast end by the Jersey Market Head House. This was where farmers from New Jersey sold their wares at the foot of High Street in the Federal period. And at the other end, by the town hall and courthouse, this was the center of city and provincial politics until Independence Hall was completed in 1753. Now, most of the 20 buildings that line the two sides of the street, each one was adopted by a different women's organization and served as their headquarters. The Slate Roof House, the replica of William Penn's home in Philadelphia, was the base of the States Committee. All receptions for governors and other American dignitaries were held here. The chairman of the States Committee, and in that day and age, you were a chairman whether you were a man or a woman, was Alva Lorimer, wife of Saturday Evening Post publisher George Horace Lorimer, and an equally powerful political figure. Evidently, she and Lizzie Martin butted heads on a number of occasions. The mansion of French-born merchant Stephen Girard served as the hostess house for the Foreign Relations Committee. The Daughters of the American Revolution occupied the Washington House, or the President's House, with furnishings copied from the first president's original inventory. The Pennsylvania Society of New England Women took over the blacksmith shop, renaming it the Paul Revere Forge in honor of their fellow Yankee. Meanwhile, the Southern ladies who constituted the Jefferson Committee held sway at the Declaration House. Here, they proudly display a replica of the Declaration of Independence in Jefferson's own handwriting and part of the carriage in which he traveled from Monticello to Philadelphia. The Emergency Aid of Pennsylvania ran an old-time restaurant in the Indian Queen Tavern, a historic inn that once stood at the corner of 8th and Market Streets, while the Philadelphia chapter of the War Mothers of America occupied the little wooden house. Now, not all of the buildings were run by women's organizations. The Public Ledger newspaper, Sarah Lowry's employer, sponsored the Franklin Print Shop. Here, costume printers used a hand press to produce a somewhat anachronistic copy of the first edition of the Public Ledger, dated March 25th, 1836. Corporate sponsorship transformed some high street houses into sales rooms for the colonial revival style that, thanks to the Sesqui, was undergoing a revival. The Indian Queen Tavern was furnished with reproductions provided by the Wanamaker department store, along with some genuine antiques from the collection of Rodman Wanamaker. Strawbridge and Clothier furnished the Jefferson House, sending its decorators to Monticello to research furniture belonging to the third president. All of the pieces were for sale in the Thomas Jefferson Room at the Strawbridge and Clothier store at 8th and Market. Then there was Dr. William Shippen House, decorated by Good Housekeeping to combine colonial charm with such modern conveniences as an ever-hot electric cooker and the Maytag Gyrofoam electric washer. All of these buildings were placed within a setting meant to evoke William Penn's original green country town. The emphasis on gardening was hardly surprising. Elizabeth Bryce Martin was one of the founders of the Garden Clubs of America. Under her supervision, volunteers from the Pennsylvania School of Agriculture, Horticulture for Women in nearby Ambler planted more than 9,000 flowers and 400 shrubs on and around the street. Sadly, because of the numerous cloudbursts, they had to replant many gardens several times over. Opening day of the Sesqui was Memorial Day, May 31st, 1926. Little about the fair was ready. The inaugural parade passed beneath the giant Liberty Bell at Oregon Avenue that was still swathed in scaffolding, and it was raining. 250,000 Shriners held their annual convention in Philadelphia to coincide with the fair's opening. They had been invited by their fellow Shriner and imperial potentate, Mayor W. Freeland Kendrick. Disgusted by the lack of preparation, they went home after 3 days and told their friends and neighbors across America, don't bother with Kendrick's carnival. It was a PR disaster from which the fair would never recover. Well, soon after they left, the High Street of 1776 had its own dedication. It too was still a work in progress, and many of its buildings were swathed in scaffolding. And once again, it was raining. The Sesqui is probably the most waterlogged World's Fair in history. It rained on 107 of its 184 days. The colorful ceremony featured a colonial band which led the mayor and the women's committee from one end of High Street to the other. At the end of the ceremony, Elizabeth Martin gave Mayor Kendrick the key to the street of 1776. The mayor promptly handed it back to her, signifying that the Sesqui managers were leaving control of the street strictly in the women's hands. Smart move. Well, at first, attendance was low at the street, as it was everywhere at the Sesqui. Only 270,000 visitors attended the fair during its first full month of operation. They were expecting at least 5 million visitors. The rainy weather, which turned the unpaved High Street into a mud bog, did not help. But before long, the street of 1776 became one of the most popular attractions at the fair. On an average day, as many as 5,000 visitors might visit the different houses. School groups, like this group of students and alumni from Central High School, flocked to the street to learn about American history. Governors and state executives visiting the Sesqui made a pilgrimage to the Slate roof house, where they turned their state flag over to Mrs. Lorimer and were served tea. Women's organizations holding their conventions at the Sesqui also made a pilgrimage to their group's headquarters. Here, daughters of the American Revolution posed for a photo at the Washington Mansion during the 4th of July. Every Wednesday afternoon, the Philadelphia Art Alliance staged a historical pageant entitled The Spirit of 1776, which climaxed with George Washington delivering his farewell address to the Continental Army. But even on normal days, the street bustled with activity. A grand lady fluttered her handkerchief from a sedan chair carried by liveried servants. Hostesses in mob caps greeted visitors and answered their questions. A town crier rang his bell, broadcasting news of upcoming events. Years before colonial Williamsburg was developed, the Women's Committee had created the winning formula for an interactive tourist environment. Visitors were charmed not only by the street's constant activity, but by its cozy interiors, its pleasant gardens, and its reassuringly human scale, which provided a welcome counterpoint to the broad avenues and sun-baked plazas of the rest of the Sesqui, which even on the busiest days seemed eerily empty. While the street of 1776 was the primary effort of women at the Sesqui, it was far from the only one. The Girl Scouts of Philadelphia were given charge of a small house representing a typical American home, where they staged cooking classes and homemaking pageants. The YWCA of Philadelphia built a replica of Mount Vernon to serve as a welcome center for Sesqui visitors. Meanwhile, at the new Sesqui Stadium, there were an unprecedented number of women's sporting events, including the AAU National Women's Track and Field Championship. One building that I have been unable to locate was the Hostess House for Negroes, erected at a cost of $5,000 by the Federation of Colored Women's Clubs. I know it was somewhere in this area, but not a single map has it. This ended up being the de facto center for African American life at the fair, with a cafeteria and an emergency health station for black visitors. There were many restaurants and a fully staffed hospital elsewhere on the fairgrounds, but if you were black, you were expected to go there. The Sesqui Women's Committee did feature a colored advisory member who served as a liaison with the Federation of Colored Women's Clubs. But sadly, segregation and institutionalized racism were integral features of the Sesqui-Centennial. African American visitors were often made to feel unwelcome and uncomfortable in venues outside the Hostess House. The only black faces white visitors were likely to encounter at the Sesqui were the orchestra members at the Indian Queen Inn, shown at right, costumed as field hands. After the street of 1776, the major Sesqui attraction sponsored by women was a replica of Sulgrave Manor, the ancestral home of the Washington family in Northamptonshire, England. This was also located near the street, along a leafy stretch of South Broad Street across from the stadium. This was the brainchild of the National Society of the Colonial Dames of America. The Pennsylvania chapter, one of the nation's largest, had recently moved into its new headquarters on Latimer Street. Many prominent society members, such as Sarah Logan Wister Starr and Elizabeth Martin, also held executive positions on the Women's Committee. There was a lot of overlap. The Society's involvement in Sulgrave Manor had begun in 1914 when it began sending donations to the historic but crumbling house. Over the years, the National Society had donated tens of thousands of dollars toward its restoration. The 52 state chapters of the Society raised $20,000 to construct a replica of the original manor designed by Ritter and Shea from the original 16th century architectural plans. On display were relics from the original manor, portraits of Washington and his family, antique Jacobean furniture, and exhibits illustrating the activities of the colonial dames of America. Sulgrave Manor had the honor of being the first Sesqui attraction to open to the public on June the 1st. In the first few days of the Sesqui, it and the model Federal Post Office were literally the only exhibits open for business. You could go to Sulgrave Manor, you could mail yourself a letter and watch it get postmarked. That was it. The fair's main exhibition halls were empty except for workmen unpacking cases, and ground hadn't even been broken yet for many of the smaller attractions. Sulgrave Manor was officially dedicated on June 25th with the choir of Christ Church singing both America and God Save the King. With this structure, the dames could honor the memory of the nation's first president while remaining true to their pre-revolutionary roots. Women's accomplishments at the fair ranged far beyond the high street of 1776, Sulgrave Manor, and Mount Vernon. Hospitality was the key principle of the Women's Committee, whose members pledged to, quote, act as hostesses and guides, and to conduct visitors around the many shrines that are memorials of the beginning of this great nation. The Women's Publicity Committee made sure that High Street was prominently featured in dozens of publications, from the Saturday Evening Post to the American Magazine of Art to the Pennsylvania School Journal. Besides promoting the street of 1776 in the Public Ledger, Sarah Lowry co-authored the Book of the Street with Martha Stewart Ludlam. The book, which described the historical significance of the buildings lining the street, sold over 10,000 copies. The Women's Committee also created pamphlets directing visitors on self-guided tours of historic Philadelphia. They organized bus tours to Stenton, Wick, and other historic buildings in Germantown. Within Center City, tourists had long complained about the shabby condition, the limited hours, and the poor quality of the city-appointed guides at Independence Hall and other historic shrines. The Women's Committee convinced City Hall to spruce up the sites and expand visiting hours while providing their own knowledgeable guides. Women's Committee activities extended to running information booths at the city's train stations and main hotels and insisting upon women police officers for the Sesqui grounds. They even consulted with Market Street merchants on ways to improve the condition of the increasingly decrepit commercial corridor to attract Sesqui visitors. And finally, they even sponsored nightly Charleston contest to attract visitors to the fair, awarding a silver cup to the best dancers. During the Sesqui, the Women's Committee formed a strategic alliance with Fisk Kimball, the new director of the newly renamed Philadelphia Museum of Art. While waiting for the new museum to be opened, Kimball began a campaign to preserve the historic, yet neglected mansions that dotted Fairmount Park. The museum had recently restored Mount Pleasant, a 1761 country seat in East Fairmount Park. Kimball wanted to publicize the museum's efforts by attracting visitors to the newly refurbished yet empty house. In a matter of weeks, the Women's Committee turned the empty house into a showcase. They assembled a rare collection of American furniture and art, creating 5 period rooms dating from 1760 to 1776. Running between July 1st and November 1st, the ad hoc sort of pop-up exhibition attracted over 7,000 visitors. They were able to see a pair of armchairs that once belonged to the Penn family, Benjamin Franklin's chess table, and a tall case clock designed by David Rittenhouse. As the Sesqui drew to its sorry close, the Women's Committee debated making their popular High Street a permanent attraction, rebuilding its temporary structures in brick and steel. But the street's architects estimated that it would cost over $700,000 to reconstruct the street. Finally, the Women's Committee had to concede that the High Street could not be preserved. When the Sesqui closed its doors at December 31st, 1926, it was universally acknowledged that Philadelphia's Second World's Fair was a fiasco. That quote was published by a number of newspapers. Besides its low attendance, the Sesqui was a financial sinkhole for the city. Its official price tag to the city was $33 million, which means probably anywhere from 5 to 10 times that amount. Basically, I would say that the cost of the fair would have come to about $2 billion in today's dollars, and it drove the city into insolvency. Yeah. But thanks to its, it was also universally acknowledged that Sulgrave Manor and the High Street of 1776 were among the few bright spots in a gloomy landscape. The organizing committees behind both attractions were awarded gold medals by the executive committee of the fair. Thanks to its sizable subsidy and the skillful management of the Women's Committee, the street of 1776 was one of the few Sesqui attractions to actually turn a profit. Meanwhile, Sulgrave Manor raised over $15,000 to help rebuild and restore the west wing of the original house. I think it's worth noting that the Women's Committee chair, Elizabeth Martin, was one of the few senior officers at the Sesqui who received no compensation by her own choice. Most of the men, including those whose contributions were dubious at best, received salaries of $10,000 to $15,000. That would be the equivalent of $180,000 to $275,000 in today's money. Nice work if you can get it. The Record newspaper wrote, quote, "If the men of Philadelphia had undertaken to serve their city with half of the zeal, enterprise, and efficiency manifested by the women of this group during the Sesqui, there would be a different story to tell of the celebration of the nation's birthday." In August 1927, the weather-beaten buildings of the High Street, along with other accessories, were sold for $1,750. They were in pretty bad condition. They had been battered by storms all winter. And this was still a heck of a lot better than the giant Liberty Bell at Oregon Plaza, which had cost well over $100,000 and was knocked down for $60 at auction. Sulgrave Manor met a somewhat happier fate. It was purchased for $3,500 by state senator and Chestnut Hill real estate magnate George Woodward. Woodward had the building dismantled and its key elements moved to West Willow Grove Avenue in Chestnut Hill. The architect, H. Louis During, redesigned the structure, keeping its general layout while adding modern conveniences and giving it a Wissahickon schist exterior. Sulgrave Manor became an elegant private residence in the city's toniest district, and it is still there today. But by this time, the Women's Committee of the Sesqui had moved on. They reorganized as the Committee of 1926, dedicated to following the same lines of hospitality and historic and present-day interest that have been our record for the summer on High Street. Buoyed by their success with Mount Pleasant, the committee cooperated with the Museum of Art to restore another Fairmount Park villa. They settled on Strawberry Mansion in East Fairmount Park. The central house had been built around 1798, with 2 square wings added around 1835. After the Civil War, Strawberry Mansion had served as a beer garden, an Italian bistro, a sailor's rendezvous, whatever that is, and finally as a police station that sold bootleg liquor out of its basement. As we can see from this photo, it also sold ice cream. Thanks to a generous gift from the president of the Horn and Hardart Baking Company, a restored and refurbished Strawberry Mansion opened to the public in 1931. After a series of heart attacks, Elizabeth Price Martin died on April 5, 1932, aged 68. Her friends created a garden walk which led from Strawberry Mansion to a point overlooking the Schuylkill River, contributing plants from their own gardens, which Lizzie had admired. Sarah Lowry, who would live for another 35 years, wrote that her friend died in the heyday of her usefulness. In 2013, Strawberry Mansion underwent another restoration, which brought the great house to its present beautiful state. Meanwhile, the original Sulgrave Manor in Northamptonshire, England, continues to be the beneficiary of support from the National Society of the Colonial Dames of America. The accomplishments of the ladies of the fair echoed in many other ways long after the dismal summer of 1926. The restoration of Mount Pleasant and Strawberry Mansion helped to advance Fitzkipple's dreams of preserving other historic mansions in Fairmount Park. By 1932, 9 houses had been refurbished as part of the park's colonial chain, despite the deepening depression. The success of High Street was a major factor in Frances Ann Wister's decision to found the Philadelphia Society for the Preservation of Landmarks in 1931. This organization would be instrumental in saving Society Hill's Powell House and Hill Physic House, as well as Grumblethorpe in Germantown and Waynesboro in Chester County. The reverberations from the High Street of 1776 might have been felt as far south as Williamsburg, Virginia. Dr. Goodwin of Bruton Parish Church, seen at left here, requested the assistance of the Rockefeller family to restore the former state capitol as early as 1924. But it was not until late 1926, after the High Street had been publicized nationwide, that John D. Rockefeller Jr. agreed to underwrite what became Colonial Williamsburg. And as I mentioned earlier, the staged reenactments, living historians, costume guides, and house museums pioneered by the street would become standard practice at Colonial Williamsburg and other historical sites. 30 years after the Sesqui, Ed Bacon and other planners behind the rebirth of Society Hill would refer to the High Street as a model for an 18th century community adapted to the 20th century. During the 1976 bicentennial, women in colonial garb, or at least a disco-era interpretation of it, would usher hundreds of tourists through the colonial streets of Society Hill, repeating the actions of their grandmothers at the 1926 Sesqui. In the middle of a dismal failure of a fair undermined by political corruption and blind self-interest, the enthusiasm and determination of the Women's Sesqui Committee stands out like a beacon on a dark night. Through their outreach, the women of the fair educated thousands of Americans about the birth of their nation and helped them understand precisely what they were celebrating. They enlightened Philadelphians about the beauty that was buried deep within their modern industrial city and inspired them to unearth and restore it. Finally, they showed how the role of American women had changed and expanded over 150 years. In doing so, they demonstrated what women could achieve working together while remaining within the traditional roles that were still comfortable for many of them at this point. At the final luncheon of the Women's Committee on December 6, 1926, Sarah Lowry attempted to explain what their activities, especially the High Street of 1776, had accomplished. If High Street has taught us nothing else, it has proved to us that creed, race, social opportunities, education, personal bias, varying gifts, and much or little previous occupation cannot combine to separate women from a common purpose. We can, by our personal enthusiasm, renew that clear vision of what are the essentials of life. Let us renew it as companions, united in our relation to our country and to one another, to show the world the great treasure of Americanism that we hold in common as the joint inheritors of the pioneer, who blazed the trail for us, which is still the highway to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Thank you very much. Mary Angela, do we have time for any questions? If people have any questions? Yes, ma'am.
What's this celebration that's coming up, the 250th? What's it called?
Sesqui-Centennial. You would think they would have learned after the Sesqui-Centennial, but no. Yeah, so everyone's calling this the semi-quip. Rolls off the tongue, doesn't
You
it?
think it'll go better than the other one did?
So,
Well, I think that on a local level, it will go better. We have a lot of events lined up. You know, we have the big sports events, the FIFA soccer events, the MLB All-Star Game and things like that. And the city is committing like over $100 million to clean up not just Center City, but various neighborhoods so that the city will look in good shape. Philadelphia has been named one of the sites to visit by the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, BBC, so people will be coming here. I think part of it is that a lot of it has, the idea of a World's Fair has changed. Unless you're in Osaka or someplace where big World's Fairs are still the thing, there's going to be very little in the terms of physical development. They do hope to get the Tun Tavern rebuilt, the birthsite of the US Navy and Marine Corps. Whether that will happen in time is anybody's guess. It's going to be mostly events, activities, parades, the big ships coming to Philadelphia. So I think that within our little bubble, you can't, yeah, I mean, you don't want to make too many predictions. I think it will be a banner year for Philadelphia. For the country as a whole, I don't know. Yes, ma'am?
When are all the events supposed to be taking place? When does it start?
Basically, most of them will take place in June, during the summer months, June, July, August, but it will continue through the fall. But right now, they've also already started things like there is the Philadelphia First. Every week, there is a different celebration at a different venue about a Philadelphia First. For instance, I guess at the old Pico offices, they had the first of the first Girl Scout cookies baked in America, which were in an oven in the window of the Pico office, and we were the first place to sell them. And they'll be doing that. There'll be something, the first zoo in the United States, a new one every week. And you can go to, I think, Philadelphia 250 and find out the schedule of that. So some things have already begun, but this summer will be the big blockbuster.
Thank you.
Yeah, yes?
Are any of these women's groups that you mentioned still working on this particular celebration or not?
As a matter of fact, yes. Christine, I don't want to put you on the spot here, but this is Christine Smith, who is president of Women for Greater Philadelphia.
Yeah, we're stewards of Laurel Hill Mansion, and we're one of the Fairmount Park houses in East Fairmount Park, and we're joining hands with the other historic houses to do things and be part of the celebration. So at our mansion, we have a lot of activities, and then we have outreach from there too. There's a summer concert series that is going to focus on American music of the period. We have a historic book club coming. We've got a Heritage Day festival with the other park houses where we're doing a lot of the, the colonial crafts people and music and so forth. That is scheduled for October. So we're kind of extending it, but we're working with other people. We're working with PA 250. Also, the people who founded Women for Greater Philadelphia actually had a time capsule in 1976 for the bicentennial. In that time capsule, they had the names of 816 children who were under 10 at the time. And they were charged with giving a certificate and charged with going forward to open the time capsule in 2026 and then reseal it for 2076 for the tricentennial. So we're busy doing all sorts of things like that, and that will be a big event as well. That should be in September, so we're looking forward to that. In that is also letters from the mayor of the mayor of Philadelphia to the current mayor. At the time, 1976, it was Frank Rizzo. So he's writing a letter to Sherelle Parker didn't know it. There's also Milton Schaff was the governor,
Yes.
and he wrote a letter to the people of Pennsylvania in 2026. So that will all be opened in the time capsule as part of the ceremony. So,
And
thanks,
that's,
Tom.
thank you, I didn't mean to make you sing for yourself. And that's only one
I
of
appreciate it.
the how many Fairmount Park
Well, there are
houses?
5 in East Fairmount Park that are currently
Yeah.
open.
Okay.
You had Mount Pleasant on here, and that's closed for now, and Cedar Grove, they're both art museum houses, and they're closed. But there are 5 other ones, but, come visit us.
Yeah.
We're open in April. We're closed for the holidays, or for the, after the
Winter.
holidays, we're closed. But come visit us and,
Yeah.
see what we have to offer. But there's lots of good stuff going on.
Is there a central site, and I'm sorry, I will let you sit down after this, where people can go to find out about all the different activities at the different houses that are participating in the thing, sort of a central clearinghouse?
Yeah, I wish there were. There is a site called the Park Charms, which is supposed to be all the Fairmount Park houses, but it hasn't been really updated too much. But if you go to Women for Greater Philadelphia or Laurel Hill Mansion, which is our main site, you can find some information about that. And then the rest would be Philadelphia 250 and that sort of thing.
Right. Thank you very much. I appreciate you. Okay.
Thank you so much.
Very welcome.
Thank you, Tom, for being here. That was fantastically fascinating. I learned so many things I had no idea I needed to know. So thank you very much for being here. Thank you all so much for being here. If you're interested in any of the books that I mentioned when I was introducing Tom, or this book in specifically, we have them all back there, and I bet you if you ask him nicely, he'll sign it for you.
Or even
If you can
naturally.
just ask him however you want, he'll still sign it. Join us next month. We will be joined by Tom Weiner, who wrote a book called In Defiance, 20 Abolitionists You Were Never Taught About in School. That'll be on March 12th here. Thank you again for coming, and have a wonderful rest of your afternoon, everybody.